Plastic drowns our rivers, chokes our soil, lingers for centuries like a curse carved into the land. For most of the world, a bottle is only waste. But in the heart of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré dares to see it as a seed not of despair but of sovereignty. Imagine a country where millions still live under leaking roofs, where children crouch beneath collapsing schools, where electricity is a dream never realized. And then, from the banks of a polluted river, rises an idea so simple, yet so radical, that it turns poison into shelter, rubbish into energy, and silence into a revolution. This is not charity. This is not aid. This is dignity in the making. Stay with us because what you are about to hear may reshape how you see both waste and Africa's future. Subscribe now and walk with this story as it unfolds. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, every market day leaves behind a mountain of discarded bottles. They spill into the streets, pile up at the edges of rivers, and drift into rural streams where farmers watch their soil slowly suffocate. The landlocked nation breathes plastic. It poisons the ground, strangles the water, and turns the daily struggle for survival into an endless cycle of waste and want. In the villages beyond the city, poverty amplifies the disaster. Families huddle beneath fragile huts of straw or rusted tin. Schools collapse into dust, forcing children to study under trees where heat scorches their backs and sudden storms scatter their books. Hospitals battle shortages of power and medicine. A child is born under torchlight, a patient treated in darkness, because 2/3 of villages remain untouched by electricity. Poverty and pollution feed one another, as if bound in a curse. Into this crisis stepped Ibrahim Traoré, with a vision so radical it sounded like folly. He looked at the bottle not as decay, but as foundation. His question was disarmingly simple. What if the very object that symbolizes waste could become the backbone of construction? What if a nation buried in plastic could rise again, brick by brick, bottle by bottle? From this question emerged the eco-brick. Each bottle, collected from rivers and rubbish heaps, was washed, dried, and tightly packed with sand or soil. It became heavy, unyielding, transformed into a block strong enough to rival concrete. When stacked and bound with mortar, thousands of these bottles formed walls that stood firm against heat, rain, and time. The first demonstration houses rose quietly on the dusty edges of villages. One 2-room home, built from nearly 20,000 bottles, stood like a defiance carved into the earth. Children ran their hands across its smooth plaster, hardly believing that what had once floated in the river now held up a roof over their heads. Mothers entered its doorway with relief, no longer fearing the rains that soaked their fragile huts. Fathers spoke with pride, saying, "I built this with my own hands with bottles the world abandoned." The symbolism was profound. A bottle that once represented decay had become a shelter of dignity. A wall of waste had turned into a fortress of hope. In a land where millions lacked adequate housing, every bottle collected was a step toward survival. But the vision did not end with homes. Schools built from bottle bricks began to appear, offering children shade from the merciless Sahel sun and protection from storms that once scattered their classrooms beneath trees. For the first time, some pupils sat in sturdy rooms where light filtered softly through the plastered walls. A new generation could learn not as outcasts of poverty, but as citizens of a future. The transformation of bottles into bricks was more than engineering. It was a revolution of perspective. It said to every man, woman, and child that even the most despised object could be reborn as a cornerstone of tomorrow. And yet this was only the beginning. If a house could rise from 20,000 bottles, what might happen when a nation of millions turned its waste into walls, into light, into sovereignty? If one home can be built from the detritus of despair, what happens when an entire country learns to build its future from the very waste that once buried it? The first bottle homes were astonishing, but it was the schools and clinics that carried the vision to its emotional crest. In villages where children had once huddled beneath trees, scattered by storms, classrooms of bottle bricks rose like monuments of defiance. They stood firm against the wind, their walls built from waste, yet embodying resilience. For the first time, pupils sat at desks within walls that did not crumble, their voices echoing with laughter instead of fear. In one rural clinic, the transformation was even more profound. A small generator, fueled by recycled plastic, flickered to life. The dim light of kerosene lamps gave way to a steady glow. Nurses who had long worked in shadows looked up with tears in their eyes. One nurse whispered through her sobs, "For years I held torches in my teeth to help women give birth. Tonight I have light. It was not just electricity, it was dignity reborn. These moments spread like wildfire. Young men who had once loitered on dusty corners now queued for the chance to collect bottles, wash them, and pack them into bricks. Women formed cooperatives, turning waste into wages as they prepared thousands of eco-bricks for builders. Each construction site became a gathering of solidarity, filled with songs, laughter, and a rhythm of work that turned despair into pride. Media inside Burkina Faso soon caught wind. Local newspapers hailed it as the green revolution of plastic. Radios carried the voices of farmers who marveled at the sight of sturdy schools and clinics rising from rubbish. On social media, images of brightly colored bottle houses spread, each photo captioned with hope. For the first time, many young Burkinabe began to see themselves not as victims of poverty, but as pioneers of a new era. At the center stood Ibrahim Traoré, both humble and resolute. In a gathering inside one of the newly built schools, he addressed parents, children, and elders. His voice carried a rhythm both simple and unshakable. These bottles are not garbage. They are our future. Our young people will not hold guns, they will hold bricks. They will not destroy, they will create. The hall erupted in applause. But beyond the clapping was something deeper. A shared belief that a revolution had begun. Not a revolution of speeches or weapons, but of hands, bricks, and dignity. This was the climax of the movement inside Burkina Faso. The poorest of villages, long abandoned by modernity, now stood as laboratories of possibility. A mother who once feared storms ripping through her hut now laid her baby to rest beneath a solid roof of 20,000 bottles. A father who once worried that his children would leave to seek survival elsewhere now pointed proudly to a classroom and said, "This is our revolution." And yet, even as the nation celebrated, another stage began to prepare itself, because no revolution remains hidden for long. What began in dusty villages was now spreading across airwaves and borders. Local applause would soon be joined, or challenged by the gaze of the outside world. The question was no longer whether Burkina Faso could build with bottles, but whether the world would embrace this revolution or fear it. The first and most visible impact of Ibrahim Traoré's initiative was shelter. Families who had once cowered beneath roofs of straw or corrugated tin now found themselves inside homes that could withstand both rain and heat. For many, this was not luxury but survival. In a nation where millions were classified as lacking adequate housing, the bottle walls became more than infrastructure. They became lifelines. Jobs followed quickly. Every house built from bottles required dozens of hands. Men collected plastic from riverbanks, markets, and alleyways. Women washed and packed bottles with sand, turning them into bricks. Builders laid the foundations and carpenters framed the roofs. A new microeconomy emerged from waste, one that gave steady wages to the unemployed and dignity to the overlooked. In neighborhoods once haunted by despair, young men found themselves transformed into craftsmen, no longer idle, no longer tempted by militias or migration. The environmental benefits rippled outward. With fewer bottles burnt in open fields, the air grew cleaner, and children coughed less at night. Fewer waste dumps meant fewer breeding grounds for mosquitoes, reducing malaria outbreaks. With biofuel replacing firewood, the pressure on forests eased. Families no longer trekked miles to cut trees. The soil began to retain more moisture. Rains returned with greater consistency, and farmers whispered that the land itself seemed to be breathing again. But perhaps the greatest transformation was psychological. For decades, Burkinabe citizens had been told they had nothing. No resources, no wealth, no chance to determine their own destiny. Every aid report painted them as dependents, every donor conference as supplicants. Yet now, with every bottle turned into a brick, the people declared otherwise. They proved that even the smallest, most despised object could be reborn as sovereignty. This shift in self-perception was profound. Elders who had once warned that their sons might drift into violence now spoke with relief as those same sons carried bottles to building sites. Mothers who once feared storms collapsing their huts now entered eco-brick houses with heads held high. Children seated at desks within bottle classrooms no longer saw themselves as abandoned, but as heirs to a future they were helping to build. Politically, the project reverberated like a drumbeat. In Ouagadougou, officials saw more than schools and houses. They saw sovereignty being built with bare hands. Sovereignty not declared in speeches but cemented in walls. The symbolism was unmistakable. Burkina Faso was not waiting for donors to deliver solutions. It was crafting them from its own discarded waste. Whispers grew louder. Observers began to draw parallels between the environmental revolution and the political transformation that had swept the country. Just as bottles were being repurposed into homes, Ibrahim Traoré himself had repurposed the destiny of the state. The environmental movement was described as the social counterpart to the Ibrahim Traoré coup, both acts of defiance against dependency, both affirmations of dignity, both declarations that the nation would chart its own course. Of course, resistance was inevitable. Traditional construction companies, reliant on cement imports, questioned the safety of bottle houses. Bureaucrats demanded regulations, permits, and endless tests before approving wider adoption. Elites whispered unease, wary that too much independence from below could erode their influence. Yet the momentum from ordinary people was unstoppable. Farmers, teachers, nurses, they saw benefits too tangible to be dismissed. A farmer who had once cut wood every week now stayed home in the evenings, helping his children study beneath clean electric light. A teacher who had once scattered her pupils beneath a tree now welcomed them into a solid classroom. A nurse who had once held torches in her teeth now worked beneath a lamp powered by plastic fuel. These were not theories. They were lived realities that altered the very rhythm of daily life. And so, a nation long portrayed as poor and powerless found itself reborn in the eyes of its own people. A new identity was forming, one brick, one bottle at a time. But identity alone could not shield them from the world beyond. The applause at home was thunderous. Yet beyond Burkina Faso's borders, questions were already being asked. Would the international community embrace this new path as innovation, or resist it as a challenge to the old order? The story of bottles turned into bricks did not remain confined within Burkina Faso's borders. What began as a village initiative soon caught the attention of international organizations, journalists, and governments. The world was forced to take notice and to decide what such a movement meant for Africa's future. The first to recognize it formally was the United Nations Environment Program. Delegates visited Ouagadougou and called the Eco-Brick Homes a unique pilot of circular economy in West Africa. Their report praised how communities were transforming waste into construction material and urged neighboring states to study the model. It was an endorsement that placed a humble village project on the map of global innovation. The African Union followed, hailing the effort as a Made in Africa solution. For its officials, the bottle houses embodied sovereignty in action, proof that Africa could solve its challenges without waiting for imported technology or foreign aid. It was more than an environmental project. It was a statement of dignity for the entire continent. Europe, too, responded with curiosity. The European Union linked the initiative to its Green Climate Fund, while countries like Germany and the Netherlands dispatched engineers to test the durability of bottle bricks. Reports from European diplomats framed the project as grassroots climate action, a story they could showcase on the world stage. From the United States came more complex signals. Through the Young African Leaders Initiative, Washington celebrated Ibrahim Traoré as a symbol of youth innovation and resilience. Prestigious universities such as MIT and Stanford expressed interest in partnering on research into recycling and biofuel. Yet in corporate boardrooms, oil companies watched uneasily. The rise of plastic-derived fuel in the Sahel hinted at a future less dependent on imported petroleum, and that unsettled vested interests. Global media amplified the narrative. The BBC, Al Jazeera, and France 24 aired features portraying Ibrahim as the plastic revolutionary. National Geographic devoted a photo essay to the bottle villages, describing them as icons of hope in the heart of the Sahel. Overnight, Burkina Faso shifted from being seen as one of the world's poorest countries to being cast as a laboratory of possibility. But recognition carried with it new political weight. Supporters called it the dawn of a Burkina Faso revolution in environmental thinking, a declaration that Africa would no longer wait for handouts, but would write its own script. Critics, however, muttered about the risks of independence. Would traditional donors tolerate a model that bypassed their aid structures? Would international attention translate into genuine support or into scrutiny and suspicion? The eyes of the world were now fixed on Ouagadougou. The question was whether this spotlight would nurture the experiment or burn it. Every revolution carries both promise and peril, and Ibrahim Traoré's vision is no exception. The road ahead for Burkina Faso is lined with obstacles as real as the bottle bricks themselves, yet also with opportunities bright enough to light the horizon. The first challenge is infrastructure. Collecting millions of bottles from scattered villages is costly and slow. Roads are rough, trucks scarce, and recycling hubs limited. Without investment in logistics, scaling beyond demonstration projects will prove difficult. To grow, the initiative will need storage centers, transport networks, and a more organized system to link rural collectors with urban builders. Then comes the question of standards. Bottle houses have stood firm through storms, but critics insist that widespread adoption requires official certification. Are these walls as safe as concrete? Will they withstand fire, flood, and decades of use? Without government testing and building codes, skeptics warn, the model risks being dismissed as temporary or unsafe. Financing remains a pressing obstacle. Ibrahim's team has relied heavily on donations, grants, and local labor. Expanding recycling plants that convert plastic into biofuel will demand significant capital, from banks, international climate funds, or private investors. Yet with outside money comes the risk of losing independence, the very quality that made the project a symbol of dignity in the first place. And yet, alongside these hurdles, opportunities shine brighter still. Already, neighboring Sahel countries like Mali and Niger have expressed interest in adopting the method. If Burkina Faso can export not only its bricks but also its expertise, it could become a regional hub for waste-to-energy solutions. What began as a village experiment could reshape the environmental policies of an entire region. Tourism, too, is stirring. Foreign visitors arrive to witness the so-called eco-villages, streets lined with colorful bottle walls, classrooms powered by recycled fuel. Universities and NGOs treat them as living laboratories. In time, these villages could draw researchers, journalists, and curious travelers from across the globe, turning waste into a source not only of energy, but also of foreign exchange. Most importantly, the movement has transformed the psychology of a generation. Young Burkinabe no longer see themselves condemned to scarcity. They see themselves as creators, innovators, and guardians of their land. This shift in mindset from dependency to sovereignty is perhaps the most enduring foundation laid by the bottle revolution. The future is not guaranteed. It will demand policy reform, investment, and international cooperation. But the vision is clear: a Burkina Faso that does not beg for solutions, but builds them from its own discarded bottles. If one small landlocked nation can turn garbage into light, what stops the rest of the world from doing the same? The story of Ibrahim Traoré is not simply about plastic. It is about rewriting the fate of a nation once dismissed as poor and powerless. What the world saw as rubbish, he saw as foundation stones. What others treated as poison, he transformed into light, shelter, and education. Today, villagers walk into homes built from 20,000 bottles and feel secure for the first time. Children enter classrooms and see not decay, but opportunity. Clinics hum with electric lamps powered by recycled fuel, and forests breathe again as firewood use declines. Each wall, each lamp, each brick carries the message that dignity can be shaped with human hands. The world has begun to notice. Journalists call it a revolution, and indeed it is. A Burkina Faso revolution that redefines what development can look like when driven by local ingenuity rather than dependency. At its center stands Ibrahim, not only as a builder of homes, but as a builder of hope, whose actions echo far beyond environmental change. Some have compared his environmental crusade to the political upheaval of the Ibrahim Traoré coup. Both were born of frustration with dependency. Both declared that waiting was no longer an option. Both announced to the world, "We will not ask, we will build." Just as the coup reshaped the nation's political destiny, the bottle houses are reshaping its social destiny. And just as the coup carried risks, so too does this revolution of waste. But the spirit behind both is the same: sovereignty reclaimed. The parallel is undeniable. In politics and in society, the same heartbeat drives forward: the will to choose, the will to stand, the will to transform. The Ibrahim Traoré coup was one act of defiance. The bottle revolution is its continuation in daily life. Yet this story does not belong to Burkina Faso alone. It belongs to all of us on a planet drowning in plastic. If bottles can become schools, if trash can power hospitals, then perhaps no community is truly too poor to create. The question is not whether this works. We have seen that it does. The question is whether the world will have the courage to follow. Do not look away. Share this story. Subscribe, because the revolution of dignity has only just begun, and its next chapter may be written in your own hands.